Hello buddy, this is I Just Subscribe Now. Welcome to another one of my YouTube videos. And today, guess what I'll be talking about? Well, it's time to talk about time. So, get ready for it. So to start this video off, I thought I'll do a little demonstration, a little diagram for you to enjoy, and we're going to discuss the concepts of time. Is time real? Does it really exist? Or is there such thing as time? So this is a discussion that I've always been interested in, and I believe for a long time that time doesn't exist and it's a human concept, but there are many arguments out there, and right at this moment we're going to go into them all. So see you in a minute. Okay everybody, let's imagine for 1 minute that we go right back to the beginning of the universe, and let's go back before the Big Bang happened. That magical moment when the whole universe came to existence. And there are a couple of theories stating what may have happened. That there may have been a creationist, and also there is the Big Bang theory, which seems to be the most logical assumption out there, except for the creation theorist. So let's say that all this black space around here is the void, where nothing exists at the moment. Unless, of course, you can say that there's another universe somewhere in the distance from ours that also exists at this moment in time. But at the moment, let's just say there's one universe, and this is the first one, and the Big Bang happened just before this point. So, can time exist in this space here? Well, Einstein once said that time equals mc squared, and what he's basically saying there is time equals mass times speed squared. That's more or less what he's saying. So this is interesting because let's say without speed there can be no time. So because there's no speed in this point here, and there's no mass, of course, time suddenly becomes a void and doesn't exist. So time at this moment in time, so to speak, if we can really call it that, can only exist within this point here, within the infinite mass that at the moment is static mass. And I think that's a good way of thinking of it. If it's static mass, it has no speed. So, what is mass times 0? So if you had, let's say, 2 times 0 equals, of course, 0. Anything times 0 always equals anything, even infinity. Anything times by 0 always equals 0. So time itself in this instance can't exist, even in this space here, because it's static mass, and mass times speed squared, mass times c squared, can't exist within static mass, and that's why time doesn't exist in this point. So you can't really go back further because there's nothing happening yet, and it's like, let's say, frozen in time. And time can only exist with the velocity of mass, which creates the so-called illusion of time happening. And the way humans have come up with this time concept is that they created this, the days, the months and the years, and eventually you had times due to the measurements on a clock face, and it's all, let's say, developed from there. Of course, the year is how many times the Earth rotates around the Sun, and of course the months is how many days it takes for the Moon to travel around the Earth. Of course, there's roughly around about 12 times every year the Moon travels around the Earth. So of course there are 12 months in a year, and there's 365 days in the year. And the day is the spin the total revolution of one spin of the Earth to face the sun again at the same point. So that's where day comes from. Time, the hours, minutes and seconds is a little bit more complicated to explain, but it's all to do with the measurements on a clock face, and I think this in itself is not really part of the argument, because people have a habit of putting measurements on things that don't exist, and I can more or less prove this immediately. So remember when people say you can't measure something that has no existence, that doesn't exist, or you can't measure a concept? Well, imagine this point here is where the void is, and I say this is a cubic meter of absolutely nothing. Have I measured an existence? And the answer would most definitely be no. I've certainly measured space, but what I haven't measured is an existence. And this is where people get confused, because in this, let's say, so-called box, that's what we're measuring. We're measuring a cubic meter of absolutely nothing. So we've measured void and we've measured nothing. But we have measured a concept. Sorry, concept. Seem not to be able to spell on there, but we have measured a concept, and that's where the whole concept comes from. Humans like to put measurements on things so they can understand the so-called passing of time, but time itself is basically illusion, and the beginning of the universe certainly proves that at this point time can't exist, because mass times mc squared, and the c squared at this point would be 0. This point here would equal this, and anything times 0 is 0, so time equals 0, the beginning. But humans like to say, well, what happened before that? Because we still have a ticking clock at the moment. Well, no, because time is an illusion of mass times speed, and that's where we get it from. It's not like there's a big ticking clock somewhere in the universe that says it's 3 o'clock, 3 p.m. at the moment. So that doesn't happen. That's just a human measurement. The universe is not aware at the moment that it may be 12:32 here. I mean, it might be some other countries might say it's a different time. It's not aware of that. It doesn't care about sort of things like that. All the universe has in common is it has mass and it has speed. It has velocity, and the speed itself of the mass creates the illusion of time. And this is something that I've been arguing with a lot of people for quite a long time, and it appears that, you know, they don't really seem to get the gist of it until you explain it more fully. But of course, this so-called mass that was here originally, and let's fill this in a bit, exploded somehow. And you know, when you argue that time doesn't really exist, it's an illusion, people start asking you a number of different questions that are irrelevant to the actual cause. Some point the mass exploded. It actually looks like sunbays, but it's more than that. It sort of exploded out and it filled up this space, and the universe happened, and nobody really knows why this happened. There are some theories that suggest one thing happened or another, or became unstable, but the truth of the matter is at some point all this started to move, and that's when time was born. In fact, one could say that time accelerated at this point, because mass times mc squared, well, mc squared would say that time would equal more at this point once it started to explode, because more things happening. And of course things start to happen, one thing happened after another, and we get to see the universe that what we see today. It's all down to gravity and the atoms being created, etc. It all gets a bit too complicated, but if you take away time, you don't have any problems explaining what happened before, because this always seems to be the same question that is asked many times over and over. And people seem to get confused with it, and they automatically assume that time, there's a big ticking clock in space, and it simply isn't true. There isn't a big ticking clock in space because time itself is a concept. And at this point, I'm going to go back to video. So from that diagram you can see that even Einstein agrees that time itself is really just an illusion of mass times speed, of course squared, mc squared. And that's why Einstein was considered a genius. But a lot of scientists seem to keep on coming up with this ticking clock theory, which really doesn't exist. The ticking clock that we have in the world is mechanics made by man to measure the relationship between mass, which is the mass of the sun, the mass of the earth, and the mass of the moon, and their relationship together, creating the illusion of time and something to measure against. So we've got the year, which is measured by how many days there are. So 1 year equals 1 cycle around the sun. How many days there are is how many turns how many total revolutions the earth does on its own axis and faces the same point again. And of course the months is how many times the moon travels around the earth. So you get the illusion of something to measure against, and this is how human mind works. We seem to automatically believe in our concepts, and of course the sun, the moon and the earth exist, and of course they really do have this relationship, at least numbers, but time itself is non-existent. Time is a human concept, and many people would actually agree with me on this point, and it's a discussion that I've been saying quite a lot over many years, and it's only now that people are actually coming around to agreeing with me, because even Einstein said, of course, that time is mass times speed. And of course, if we go back to when the universe was just a pinpoint, as they say, an infinite mass, but if there's no speed, if there's no motion, so to speak, time can't exist, because that is what Einstein said. So we have to agree with him on that point, and time, therefore, unfortunately, would only be a concept. Of course we're here, and of course you can measure against it, but we're measuring in our minds. The universe is not aware of this relationship, so to speak. Well, it is, but it's not actually counting like we are. We're putting, let's say, we're spotting patterns where there really aren't any patterns. It's just part of our imagination, and it's how we make sense of the universe that really matters. But of course you can measure a cubic meter of nothing, and you can say you've measured something when in fact you've measured a concept. You've measured nothing. You've measured absolutely nothing if you measured nothing, but you've still measured. You still have a measurement of nothing, because the void has no existence within itself. It's not an existence itself, really. So therefore, if you measure it, you have measured a concept, and therefore time is similar to that, and that's what I'm getting to. Anyway, goodbye for now. Thanks for listening.